It was just past 6:30 a.m. when Claire tucked her 6-year-old son, Mason, into the passenger seat of her aging, sputtering Corolla. The air was still damp from an overnight rainstorm, and the sky held that heavy gray hue that made everything feel a little colder, a little more hopeless. The engine coughed twice before finally turning over, and Claire let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. This morning was like most others. Rushed, stressful, and laced with the kind of quiet panic only a single mother truly understands. Her job at the downtown diner started at 8 a.m. sharp, but Mason had to be dropped off at a daycare that was 2 bus routes and a long walk away. Her car had barely enough gas for one more trip, and the fuel light had been flashing at her since last night. She prayed, as she did every morning, that nothing else would go wrong. But life, as Claire knew too well, didn't run on prayers. As they pulled out of the driveway, the car gave one last groan before coming to a full, unmovable stop at a red light near the highway entrance. Claire tried everything, turning the key, pumping the gas, even smacking the steering wheel in frustration. Nothing. The tank was dry. She looked at Mason, still half asleep, clutching his dinosaur lunchbox. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, smoothing his curly hair. "Mommy's just going to figure something out." With no phone battery, no nearby gas station, and no money for an Uber, Claire did the only thing she could. She stepped out of the car and flagged down the next vehicle that slowed near the shoulder. The car that stopped was a sleek black Tesla with tinted windows. Too sleek, too perfect. It screamed money. Claire hesitated. People in cars like that didn't usually stop for people like her. But the window rolled down, revealing a man in his mid-50s with neatly combed silver hair, sharp eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses, and an expression that was more curious than annoyed. "Car trouble?" he asked. She nodded. "Ran out of gas. I'm trying to get my son to daycare and myself to work. Can you maybe give us a ride into town?" He studied her for a moment, eyes flicking toward the child in the back. Then he unlocked the doors with a quiet click. "Hop in," he said. "I'm heading that way anyway." Claire hesitated for only a second. Something in the man's voice was calm, measured. Not cold, not warm either. Just precise. She buckled Mason into the back seat and slid in beside him. The car smelled faintly of leather and cedarwood. The digital dashboard lit up like the cockpit of a spaceship, and as they glided back onto the road, the quiet hum of the electric motor was oddly soothing. They drove in silence for a few miles before the man finally spoke. "I'm Alan," he said, eyes fixed on the road. "Claire," she replied. "And that's Mason." He nodded slightly. "You work nearby?" "The diner off 4th and Market," she said. "I waitress the morning shift." He glanced at her. "Long commute." She nodded. 2 buses and a walk when the car's not working. Alan didn't say anything for a while. Then casually, "Why not find something closer to home?" Claire smiled bitterly. "Jobs don't exactly grow on trees when you've got a kid, no college degree, and no one to watch him at night. This one's flexible. Lets me take Mason in emergencies." Alan hummed, not unkindly. Then, just as they pulled into the downtown area, he said something that made Claire's heart skip. "You know, I could offer you a job." She turned to look at him, brows furrowed. "What?" "I run a small company. We do community outreach. I need someone with a good head on their shoulders. Someone who knows struggle. Real people. Not just resumes." Claire stared at him, stunned. Was this man serious? Before she could respond, Alan pulled up in front of the daycare center. He didn't drop her off at the diner. Instead, he put the car in park and turned to face her fully. "This isn't random," he said. "I saw you yesterday, at the gas station. You helped a homeless woman who everyone else ignored." Claire blinked. "You saw that?" "I did. And I remembered it." Alan reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, eyebrows knitting tighter. "Your first assignment," he said. "If you're interested, take today off. Open that when you get home. Call the number inside. You'll know what to do." Claire looked down at the envelope like it might explode in her hands. When she looked up again, Alan was already pulling away from the curb. She stood there on the sidewalk, heart racing, Mason tugging at her coat and asking if they were going to get pancakes again today. Her hands shook as she held the envelope. It was unmarked, thick, and unnervingly heavy. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and a check made out for $10,000. The letter read, "Claire, you're being watched. Not in a dangerous way, but in a way that could change your life. You have passed the first phase of a test that most people never even see. You have 24 hours to decide if you're ready for the next one. Call the number below. But be warned, it only gets harder from here." Claire's hands trembled as she folded the letter. Was this some elaborate prank? Some twisted social experiment? But the check was real. The envelope had her name typed on the inner fold, and her gut told her this was no scam. The next 24 hours would decide the course of her entire life. Claire didn't sleep that night. She had placed the check in a drawer beneath Mason's drawings, her mind racing through every possible scenario. She reread the note a dozen times. It hadn't vanished or changed. It was real. And even more terrifyingly, it was serious. Who was Alan? Why had he been watching her? And what did he mean by a test? The whole thing felt like something out of a thriller novel. Not something that happened to exhausted, underpaid single moms who spent their days slinging coffee and wiping counters. But as the sun rose and Mason stirred in his bed, Claire knew one thing. She couldn't ignore this. She waited until Mason had left for daycare, kissed him a little longer than usual, and then walked back into the apartment with the number in her trembling hand. She took a deep breath. Then she called. The phone rang only once before someone picked up. The voice on the other end was female, calm, clipped, and efficient. "Claire Martin." "Yes," she said, swallowing hard. "You've chosen to proceed." It wasn't a question. I think so. I need to understand what this is." "There will be time for understanding," the woman replied. "Right now, you need to get dressed and go to the address being sent to your phone. Your car has been filled with gas. Use it. You have 45 minutes. Before Claire could ask anything else, the call ended. Moments later, her phone buzzed with a text. 74 Kingswood Drive. Arrive no later than 9:15 a.m. She stared at the address, her stomach flipping with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had nothing to lose. She dressed in her cleanest outfit, nothing fancy, just something that made her feel confident, and stepped into her car. To her amazement, the gas tank was full. Who were these people? The drive took 20 minutes. Kingswood Drive was a quiet, affluent neighborhood lined with tall iron gates and manicured hedges. It was the kind of place where people wore tailored suits to walk their dogs and drove cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Number 74 was a sprawling, ivy-covered estate surrounded by towering stone walls and security cameras that tracked her as she pulled up. The front gate opened before she could even buzz. Claire slowly drove in. A man in a black suit, early 30s, expressionless, opened her door as she parked in the circular drive. "Please follow me," he said, not offering his name. Inside, the mansion was grand but not gaudy. Everything was clean lines, soft lighting, and quiet elegance. Claire felt like she was walking through a dream she hadn't dared imagine. The man led her into a sunlit room with massive windows overlooking a garden. There, seated in a leather armchair by the fireplace, was Alan. He looked exactly the same. Calm, sharp, watchful. "Good morning, Claire," he said. "I'm glad you came." She sat cautiously in the chair opposite him. "I still don't understand what's happening." "You will," Alan said. "But first, I need to ask you a few questions." He opened a sleek black notebook and began. "If someone handed you $1 million, tax-free, but told you you'd never be able to speak to your child again, would you take it?" Claire blinked. "No. Even if it meant he'd live a better life, financially?" "I said no." Alan nodded slowly, as if making a note in his head. "Good." He closed the book. "This isn't a game, Claire. It's not a stunt. I don't have cameras hidden in your car or your home. I'm not here to humiliate you, but I am here to test you." "Why?" she asked, almost whispering. "Because I was you once, Alan said. Because I built everything you see from nothing. And because now, I'm old enough and rich enough to realize that the world doesn't reward kindness. It rewards strategy, ruthlessness, and lies. I'm trying to prove, just once, that someone good, someone real, can still win if given the right opportunities. Claire stared at him, heartbeat thudding in her ears. You want to give me money? I want to give you challenges, Alan replied. And with each one, a choice. Pass the test and you'll receive more. But fail and it ends. No second chances. No explanations. She leaned forward slightly. What kind of challenges? Real ones, Alan said. Some moral. Some practical. Some designed to push you to your breaking point. I won't tell you what's coming. Only that it's all part of the test. Claire hesitated, looking out the window at the silent garden beyond. What happens if I pass all of them? Alan smiled. Then I give you everything. Claire sat back, stunned. Everything. My company. My wealth. My name. She stared at him, certain now that he was either brilliant or completely insane. Why me? She asked again, quieter this time. Alan's smile faded into something more thoughtful. Because you reminded me of who I used to be. Hungry, honest, and angry at a world that pretended not to see. There was a long silence. Then Alan stood and extended his hand. Your first real test begins now. Claire stood, hesitating only a second before shaking his hand. I'm ready. The car that came to pick Claire up the next morning was different. Modest, almost forgettable. A plain gray sedan, driven by the same suited man who had greeted her at the estate. He offered no conversation, only a silent nod as she climbed into the back seat, heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know where she was going. Alan hadn't told her. There was no envelope this time, no map, no explanation. Only a whispered phrase as she'd left the mansion the day before. Your integrity will be measured when no one is watching. She repeated it to herself now, like a riddle, trying to divine meaning from it. Integrity. Alone. No one watching. What did that mean? 30 minutes later, the car stopped in front of a worn-down strip mall on the edge of the city. A dusty storefront bore a cracked sign. Turner's Pawn and Loans. The driver turned to her, finally speaking. There's a red purse sitting on the floor near the back of the pawn shop. Go in, wait until no one's looking, and take it. Then walk out. Claire stared at him. You want me to steal? He didn't blink. You've been given instructions. This is the test. Her mouth went dry. I thought this was about proving I was a good person. Is that what you believe? The man asked. Or do you just want the money? Claire climbed out of the car slowly, confusion and anxiety twisting her stomach. She stood in front of the pawn shop, watching as a man exited with a guitar in one hand and a smirk on his face. The inside of the shop was cluttered, dimly lit, and heavy with the scent of old electronics and desperation. She stepped through the door. A bell chimed above her head. Behind the counter stood a bored-looking teenager wearing headphones. He barely looked up as she entered. A security camera blinked lazily in the corner, but it seemed more decorative than functional. She spotted it quickly, the red purse. It was propped against a stack of old VCRs, almost hidden. Faded leather, the kind that had once been expensive but now looked forgotten. A thin layer of dust coated the floor beneath it. She circled casually, pretending to examine a rack of watches, trying to think. What would Alan want her to do? If she stole the purse, she'd be proving. What? That she could follow orders? That she was willing to compromise her morals for the sake of a test? But if she didn't steal it, would she be failing to play the game? To trust the process? Claire moved closer to the purse. Her breath was shallow, her heartbeat loud. She looked over at the teen behind the counter. He had his feet up now, watching something on his phone. No one would see. She reached down slowly, almost in slow motion, then stopped. Her eyes had landed on a small tag tied to the purse's handle. It read, "For testing purposes only, do not remove." Claire blinked. Her mouth parted slightly in disbelief. It was a trap, a setup. She straightened, heart pounding in a different way now. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her jacket and pulled out a piece of paper and a pen she always kept for Mason. On the back of a diner receipt, she scribbled a note. Saw your tag. Chose not to take it. Some things aren't worth the price. She tucked the note into the purse, turned, and walked out. The driver was waiting for her at the curb. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and gestured for her to get back in the car. They drove in silence, and Claire's thoughts raced. Had she passed? Had she failed? She didn't know, and perhaps that was the point. Back at her apartment that evening, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single card. Embossed in simple black letters, it read, "Well done, but the next test won't be so clear." Behind the card was a cashier's check for $20,000. Claire sat down slowly at the kitchen table, staring at the paper like it was a bomb about to go off. The amount stunned her. It was more than she made in an entire year at the diner. Enough to pay off debts. Enough to move to a better apartment. Enough to breathe. But the real weight didn't come from the money. It came from the question, how far was she willing to go? The next morning, Claire received no instructions. No call. No text. She went to work as usual, serving burnt eggs to half-awake patrons and dodging the greasy flirtations of her manager, Pete. She kept checking her phone, half expecting a message to come through, but the screen stayed dark. Days passed. 1, then 2, then 3. She began to think the test was over. That maybe the pawn shop had been a fluke. That maybe she'd been wrong about everything. Until the 4th day. She returned home to find her door slightly ajar. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, one hand on Mason's backpack, the other already dialing 911. But when she stepped inside, heart racing, she saw no sign of a break-in. No mess, no missing items. Just one thing. Lying on the kitchen counter was another envelope. It was sealed in red wax this time, marked only with a single word. Loyalty. Claire's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a new note. No check. No hint of what was to come. Just 5 words, handwritten in ink. This time, it's someone you love. Claire stared at the 5 chilling words. This time, it's someone you love. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she dropped into the nearest chair. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock, each second pounding louder than the last. She rushed to Mason's room. Empty. His toys were still scattered across the floor. His superhero blanket was bunched at the foot of the bed. Claire ran to the bathroom. Empty. She checked her phone. No messages from daycare. No missed calls. Her heart thudded so hard it hurt. She snatched up the phone and dialed the daycare immediately. Hi, it's Claire Martin. Did anyone pick him up today? A pause. Then the director's warm voice. Oh yes, he's fine. A man on your emergency contact list picked him up at 3. Tall, gray hair. Said his name was Alan? Very polite. Claire let out a breath that shook her ribs. Alan, of course. Her relief was immediate, but short-lived, because now she knew what he meant. The test had started. Someone she loved. Mason was part of it. She felt a white-hot fury rise in her chest. This had crossed a line. The money, the mystery, the moral riddles, fine. But her son? She grabbed her coat and stormed outside, unsure of where she was even going. But as she stepped onto the curb, a different car, a sleek, black SUV, rolled to a stop in front of her. The driver's window lowered. It wasn't Alan. It was a woman. Mid-40s, sharp cheekbones, no expression. Get in, she said. Claire hesitated only for a second. The SUV pulled away without a word. The city blurred past her window, and every minute that passed made Claire more tense. Where's my son? She asked. The woman glanced at her through the rearview mirror. He's safe. This is about you. Then don't involve him. That's exactly what this test is about. Claire clenched her jaw. They pulled into a quiet industrial area near the docks. The SUV stopped in front of an old brick warehouse with rusted shutters and faded graffiti. It looked abandoned. The woman turned off the engine, then handed Claire a manila envelope. "This is your test," she said. "What you do next will determine everything." Claire opened the envelope. Inside was a single photo. A man's face, scruffy beard, sunken eyes, maybe late 30s. The name Jared Lonsdale was typed beneath it. A folded sheet of paper accompanied it. Jared Lonsdale is a convicted con artist who's currently under the radar, suspected of scamming dozens of low-income families. Today, he'll be at the Waterfront Café at exactly 4:30 p.m. You are to sit with him, listen to him, engage him, and walk away with any proof of his current scam. You have 30 minutes. You must not reveal who sent you. Claire's hands trembled slightly. What if I fail? The woman looked at her, expression unreadable. Then you go home. The game ends. And you'll never hear from us again. And my son? The woman gave her a slow, calculated look. Safe, but never involved again. You'll return to the life you had, with no contact, no access to Alan or his resources. The door shuts. Permanently. Claire nodded. It was clear now. This wasn't just about integrity anymore. This was about courage. The cafe sat on the edge of the water, its patio overlooking the bay. Sailboats drifted lazily in the distance, and the sun cast a golden glow across the pavement. Claire spotted him immediately. Jared, just like the photo, leaning back in his chair, sipping from a chipped mug, a satchel on the ground by his feet. She approached carefully, as if she belonged there. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He looked up, surprised but not suspicious. His eyes flicked across her quickly, and a smile curled at the edge of his lips. "Sure," he said. "Always happy to make a new friend." She sat down. Claire didn't know what to expect. He looked like someone who had been beaten down by life. But there was something behind his eyes, cunning calculation, that gave her pause. "Nice day," she offered. He nodded. "You local?" "Sort of," she said. "Between jobs right now." He grinned. "Then maybe you're the person I was meant to meet today." There it was. The hook. Jared reached into his satchel and pulled out a glossy brochure, shiny, polished, professional-looking. It showed a startup housing project for struggling single parents, complete with smiling families and bold promises of financial relief. "We're looking for early supporters," Jared said, sliding the brochure toward her. "Tiny investment, massive return. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You'd be helping families just like yours and securing a future for your own." Claire flipped through the brochure. It looked too perfect, too rehearsed. He launched into a rehearsed pitch about grants, government partnerships, and matching funds from fake nonprofits. Claire let him talk. She asked questions. She leaned into the character of a desperate, hopeful single mom. She let her hands shake as she pulled a recording app open on her phone beneath the table. He didn't notice. By the end of the half hour, Jared was handing her a paper form to get started. A fake sign-up sheet for contributors. Claire smiled, folded the paper, and stood. "Thank you," she said sweetly. "I'll think about it." As she walked away, heart pounding, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Well played. Return to the warehouse." Back at the brick building, Alan stood alone in the open bay. A faint wind rattled the tin shutters. He looked proud. "You didn't just pass," he said. "You exposed a predator. And you never asked what was in it for you." Claire handed him the recording and the forged form Jared gave her. "I didn't need to ask," she replied. "I already knew what was at stake." Alan smiled faintly. "Your loyalty," he said, "is no longer in question." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a key. "This is for the place you and Mason are moving into. It's already furnished, rent-free, safe neighborhood, and close to a better school." Claire stared at him in stunned silence. What?" Alan's voice softened. "This isn't a reward. It's preparation. You're ready for the final test. And you'll need all your strength." Claire's voice barely rose above a whisper. "What's the final test?" Alan looked her dead in the eyes. "Trust." Claire stood in the hallway of her new apartment, The key Alan had given her still clenched tightly in her palm. The building smelled like fresh paint and possibility. No leaking pipes. No mold creeping up the corners. A real kitchen. A bedroom for Mason. It didn't feel like a gift. Felt like a beginning. But Alan's words echoed in her ears. This isn't a reward. It's preparation. You're ready for the final test. Trust. That night, Claire tucked Mason in early. He didn't fully understand why they had moved. He only knew the new place had a bigger window and a playground nearby. As she turned off the lights in his room, her phone buzzed once again. A new message. Final instructions will arrive at sunrise. Be ready. Pack nothing. Nothing else. No name. No location. Just be ready. Claire barely slept. Her dreams were a blur of Mason slipping through her fingers and Alan watching from a distance. The kind of dream where you wake up not knowing whether to cry or scream. At 5:57 a.m., there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find the same woman from the SUV standing there. No words were exchanged. Claire stepped out, Mason still sleeping soundly under the care of a sitter Alan had arranged. She trusted that, if nothing else. The drive was long. Out of the city. Into the wooded hills where the roads narrowed and fog crept low across the ground like fingers searching for something. Finally, they arrived at a secluded cabin. Wooden. Stark. Surrounded by nothing but silence and pine. The woman handed Claire a blindfold. You must wear this inside. Claire didn't argue. She slipped it on, darkness engulfing her. Her breathing slowed. The creak of a door. The crunch of gravel. Then silence. Sit, said a voice. Alan. Claire obeyed. Hands in her lap. Muscles taut. What you've done so far proves your strength, Alan said. Your values. Your ability to resist temptation and pressure. But this final test is different. It's not about action. It's about surrender. Claire flinched. Surrender. To trust, he said. Then he was silent for a long time. Remove your blindfold. She did, and found herself not in a room, but in a clearing. No cabin. No chair beneath her. Just soft grass and trees and early light breaking through the clouds. She turned, and Alan was standing just behind her. This, he said, is the final illusion. He gestured to a stone bench nearby, where a small box sat. Wooden, plain, locked with a brass latch. Inside this box is your choice. Claire stared at it, unsure whether to move or freeze. One key opens it, Alan continued, but you'll find 3 keys hidden in this clearing. You may choose any one. Only one opens the box. You have 10 minutes. What happens if I choose wrong? She asked. Alan smiled faintly. Then the offer disappears. Everything goes back to the way it was. You'll be free. No more tests. But no more us. Claire looked out over the clearing. The light shimmered between the trees. It wasn't a test of chance. She knew that much. This was something else. She walked into the woods, the morning mist curling around her ankles. 3 keys. 1 lock. A puzzle with no clues unless the clues weren't physical. She found the first key beneath a stone etched with the word fear. The second dangled from a branch labeled hope. The third sat submerged in a shallow stream, next to a carved wooden plank that read memory. Claire knelt by the stream, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She looked back toward the bench and the box. Fear. Hope. Memory. She thought about Mason. The nights she cried while he slept, terrified that she was failing him. She thought of the moment she chose not to steal the purse. She remembered Jared's face as he handed her a lie wrapped in paper. But mostly, she remembered her first ride with Alan. That moment when she was at her lowest, and a stranger had given her a chance without asking anything in return. She chose memory. The key was cold and heavy in her palm. Back at the box, she took a breath and inserted the key. Clicked. The lid lifted. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter read, "Trust is the choice to believe when no guarantee is offered." You trusted the stranger. You trusted the system. Most importantly, you trusted yourself. The greatest test has always been whether you could stand firm in your own worth. Welcome to your new life. You've earned it. The check was made out to Claire Martin for $1 million. She stared at it for a long time, not in disbelief, but in quiet knowing. This wasn't a miracle. It was the result of every hard decision she'd made when no one was watching. 1 year later, Claire walked into her nonprofit's new headquarters, a converted community center now serving hundreds of struggling parents. Her name was on the wall, but she rarely mentioned the money. Only the mission. She paused in the hallway as a young mother nervously stepped through the doors, her toddler tugging on her coat. Claire smiled gently and offered a hand. "Hi, I'm Claire. I think we might be able